Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
Good evening and welcome to Teachers Talk Radio. We've got a special this evening with Dr. Neil Gilbride, who we'll hear from in just a second. We're talking all about Bandura's self-efficacy theory in action, which is published by John Catt Publishers or Publication, and they also sponsor tonight's show, so we'll hear more about them a bit later. So I'm the host tonight, so my name is Ben White. I have relatively high sense of self-efficacy. Dr. Gilbride can correct me, I think, when I'm teaching A-level psychology in very particular topics, and very low when I'm trying to play my guitar and sing at the same time, which I just cannot do at the moment. And it's moderate when it comes to doing live video, so we'll see how that all pans out. Dr. Neil Gilbride is a chartered psychologist with over almost 20 years or over 19, take your pick, experience working in education. He has held roles as a teacher, researcher, psychologist, academic, and writer, working across a number of different sectors. In particular, he's currently an Associate Dean of Learning at Ambition Institute and Honorary Senior Research Fellow at the University of Worcester. Welcome, Neil. Thanks for coming along.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Did I miss anything in that intro?
Oh,
so
no,
current projects. Okay, fantastic. So what we're going to do today, hopefully, is give you the chance to talk in an excited way about Bandura and why his ideas are vital or possibly significant enough to make us think and change what we do as classroom teachers or school leaders or those working in schools. So I thought we'd kick off with, well, why did you write this particular book? What have we got on that?
Thank you. Since I started reading psychology from when I was 19, 20, and then progressing that through into either my MA or going into teaching, so kind of applying some of these ideas in practice, or then going on to do my PhD, which was particularly looking at how adults make decisions. I think there's a consistent theme that runs through all of that for me, which is why are we in the game? Why do we educate? What's the big question? Why do we actually educate at all, whether it's an adult or whether it's a child? And for me, there are many goals for that, but the big one is we are trying to help individuals feel they can shift and shape the course of their lives, that they can take decisions that will help themselves and their communities. I'm not quite sure what else we're in the game for. I mean, we could be in the game for many reasons, but if that's not a central thing that we're ultimately aiming toward, whether that's we believe in powerful knowledge or whether we believe in developing skills over time or whatever aspect of kind of the education debate, surely the thing we keep coming back to is so that individuals feel they can shape the course of their lives. And that's agency. And one of the core ideas behind all of Bandura's work is the notion of agency, that people feel they can make decisions and to have an influence and shape of their life. And central to that is the feeling that that our actions in a specific domain will yield some form of positive outcome. And why would we act if we didn't believe it would lead to a positive outcome? So yeah, it's that idea of agency.
So we're going to get into those details as we kind of talk through the key themes and ideas in your book. Before we get to that, you have explained the reason you wrote the book, and you tell me if I've slightly misheard this, is you think Bandura has something to say about why we're in the game at all, why we're teaching.
Yeah.
We want students to feel that they can shift and shape the direction and course of their own lives. Yeah. So this is exciting, and it's good to have that purpose. Is that something you tell people, or is it something they have to learn? Can you tell me a little bit about that? Because I can tell my class that you can shift and shape your own life, but that's not it, is it? I feel like there's more.
Yeah, that's where the self-efficacy concept comes in. It's that part of feeling we can do that is having a sense that our actions in a domain will yield a positive outcome. And so then how we design our instruction, how we design practice, how we design behavior, how we help individuals with behavior, they become central ideas that we can think about to help individuals feel and know that their actions will yield some form of positive outcome. And so it's thinking really hard about essentially, why we're doing what we're doing, but then also orientating our actions and our instruction and indeed our work with pupils around those central ideas, that idea of how does my action with this child, how does my instruction, how does my support of this child help increase the likelihood that they feel their actions will yield to a positive outcome.
Okay, so it seems like a good way to kind of find out more about the book is we're going to pause a while and be really clear on what self-efficacy is and isn't. Then we're going to wander through those categories you introduced of instruction and practice and behavior. And along the way, we might refer to baking cakes and mystery dinner party guests. That's all to come. So I think you say in your book that self-efficacy is not motivation. So I thought maybe you can help us a bit with being really clear. What is self-efficacy and what is it not? And possibly how is motivation not quite where it's at?
Yeah, so I think so. I'll repeat it again and again and again. Forgive me, forgive listeners and watchers. And we keep saying, action that our actions in a specific domain will yield to a positive outcome. The key idea there is it's specific to a domain, as you pointed out in your introduction, Ben. Like there's certain things which you feel you're efficacious in, that you can take those actions and it's going to lead to a positive outcome. And there's certain circumstances where, or certain situations or scenarios where that doesn't appear to be true, or at least you don't feel your actions will lead to that positive outcome. I often find when educators talk about confidence, I think deep down they actually mean efficacy. And they're different things. So first of all, kind of what's it not in terms of confidence and self-esteem? These are different aspects of kind of our psychological architecture, important, but they're much more, I would describe them as global. By that, I mean, they're not specific to a particular domain. They're not necessarily linked to our actions. Like confidence is more about how we kind of almost project that sense of self, like I appear confident. And kind of that self-esteem is that global self-worth, how much I value myself as a person. And as with all psychology, all these things interweave and interlink, as much as we like to, you're a psychology teacher, we like to put the psychology in little boxes but they all interlink.
And overlap, presumably.
And absolutely. Like is someone's self-worth, if someone's got a low self-worth, are they likely to have high areas of self-efficacy? Probably not. Like, we've got to recognize there are interconnections. But with self-efficacy, we know there are specific techniques and approaches that we can apply, which will hit that target very, very well. In relation to motivation, it's probably a bit of a hot take, and one that not probably all psychologists agree with, but I think it is distinct from motivation, in so much that motivation could be internal or external. But okay, you're highly motivated and that is about for yourself, great. But I think self-efficacy taps into a broader goal around agency that I don't think motivation taps into. So it's kind of hitting into something a bit
more. So it's more, you're saying it's more actionable. So if I come back from a lesson and say, my class are not motivated to learn, I think maybe I'm just telling you they're not doing what I want them to do. And there's not a lever to pull. There's not a... Okay. If I say, I think their self-efficacy is low, that's different, isn't it? So it's then, okay, so this is good. I was quite drawn by the idea. I think it might be because, as you said, I'm teaching psychology. We're towards the end of the course. We're on the free will determinism debate. It's a really tricky thing to get across. You mentioned that self-efficacy has a reciprocally deterministic relationship with our environment.
Yes.
I like this idea a lot because it makes me feel like it's something I can manipulate, and controls would be too strong, but I can have a role to play in the outcome. So over the next X number of weeks, I can do something so my students feel that they can do it and do it. Can you tell me, have I got that right? And can you give me some examples of how that works?
Absolutely. So I think it's one of the most, and again, this is where I think it a whole slightly different to motivation, where how it describes the human in terms of, are we puppets to our context, or are we in complete control of our own destiny? And Bandura's work was very much centered right in the middle. It was that notion that we are made up of both how the environment interacts with our self system. And so this idea of we being reciprocally determined, that the environment and the individual are constantly supporting each other into becoming. So what I mean by that is like how we act on the environment affects the environment, how the environment acts on us affects us, and round it goes. And so I love the idea that we can shape our environment and our environment can shape us.
Okay,
I think
and that
that's
we
really
is
powerful.
me as a teacher, and it's my students as well. So I can teach them that same lesson. You can teach yourself. If you do a small action and then reflect on the impact it's had, you start to learn, you can do it. And maybe that's where the motivation comes, because I feel I can do it, but there's a kind of secondary. So it's interesting. I was speaking to Martin Griffin about a month or so ago. He wrote A-Level Mindset, he's an author. He's really interested in story. So I just try this idea out on you. You can see whether it relates to your book, because I thought it did, but that's maybe because I've just been speaking to both of you. So he talks about narrative, the shape of a story in our lives. So we all tell ourselves a story of some kind. I've got a self-narrative. And he says, when you're writing a complex story, you've got to have these, he calls them try-fail cycles. So character starts, lots of things go wrong. Along the way, they try, they fail, they try, they fail, they learn. And there's a point when they look back and they look at all the progress they've made. And then that's when they're becoming, it's when they feel like they're arriving. It means they're kind of tackling the monster. The story starts to become like a positive one. And that's stuck in my head. And then I read your book that said self-efficacy has a reciprocally deterministic relationship with the environment. I thought that's the same thing. I think when I'm designing a course, I want my students to try to get it right, to learn they can do it, and then to do it again.
Yeah.
So this is So can you give me examples of what that looks like in different subjects you spent time with?
Right. Okay. So, for example, if I go back to science, solid liquid gas is one that I love because you've got increasing levels of difficulty, in particular when you start to give, some students have got an idea of what solid liquid gas is. They've got those kind of deterministic kind of definitions, and then you give something that behaves like both. So a classic one is sand. Sand is really is a classic one because if you put it in a jar, it behaves exactly like a liquid. It's a solid, but it behaves like one, and it throws students. And so here it's that, okay, right, the complexity's ramped up a little bit. This is a more complex form of practice. Right, let's see if you're going to have a go, and to what extent you feel like you can try in this more ambiguous situation. And here, them having a go, even if they're not sure, will produce the feedback which they will need to know that their actions led to a positive outcome, or the feedback that will improve their actions. So the next time they're given something that behaves a bit like solid liquid, and they're not sure, it's ambiguous, they can use that feedback to have another go. And so that's a kind of classic example of where we might set up a practice to not necessarily it's about being right, wrong, but it's about the feedback that one might give in order for a student to link their action to an outcome, or to improve their action toward an outcome.
Meet 2025 BET Award winner Kialo EDU, the 100% free tool for thoughtful, inclusive classroom discussion. On Kialo, students contribute instantly and simultaneously to create an interactive map of a discussion, deepening their subject knowledge and enhancing their critical thinking skills. Set tasks, track participation, and provide personalized feedback in just a few clicks. And since it's compatible with all your favorite LMS platforms, it slots seamlessly into your existing workflow. Over 1 million educators and students are already using Kialo to make the world a more thoughtful place. Join them today at kialo-edu.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out! Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading!
I think I've missed something. So I've got one side where I set up a lesson, you work hard on this thing and then you get it right, and your self-efficacy, your sense of being able to carry out particular action to meet a particular goal is met positively, and that's all good. And also there's times when I want them to learn what you're doing isn't working, it's not meeting that goal, and then you need to change that thing. So that's the other side, isn't it? And presumably you have to do, how do you do that in a constructive way?
And that's what we talk. Part of what we talk about in the book is managing failure. There's a whole section on actually when learning fails, or when a particular action fails. How can you go about doing that constructively? So we talk about the notion of, for example, recognizing but not living in the emotion. So actually, there will be an emotive reaction. That's okay. So letting someone feel that, but then work through. And then the next step is helping them to understand what specifically in their actions didn't go to plan.
Okay.
And then the next goal. Okay. And goal setting is a huge part of self-efficacy. It's massive.
So I'm going to go back a step. This is good. So I'm going to go, I've learned a simple understanding of the states of matter. And there was a point when I received feedback because I got some basic questions right. I know my solid from my liquid from my gas.
Yeah.
And then you set me a new challenge and you said, look at this, sand is doing this. Is that like a liquid? But wait, it's not a liquid, is it? And then I feel something, presumably. So you're saying validate those feelings, as in recognize they're there. So you feel sad or frustrated or confused. Then I need to then have a new goal. So then my new goal is we need to change your model. This is inadequate. We need to think again about. So this is the aim. So I think we need to come back to that feelings part in a little while. But we're going to save that for a bit, because my next question is, many of us are parents. Many of us attempt baking. So we've got a slightly tangential question, which is, do you bake? Do your kids bake?
Yes, I do. And we definitely do. Yes.
Right. Okay. So talk to me about, I'm trying to do lots of work examples. We've had a bit of science. We've now got, if I was trying to teach my children to bake and I've read your book, how is it going to help? Because I think it might.
Okay. Yeah, well, that's really kind of you. First of all, it really means a lot that a parent might pick this up and go, I think the first thing is, what's the goal, right? So establishing a goal based on where they're currently at. What is a reasonable goal for that person to achieve? And what's the steps that you take to get there? So if you set that goal of, okay, first time someone's baking, this is going to be on Great British Bake Off, then the likelihood of failure is high, and therefore the likelihood of them feeling that they can take actions to a positive outcome will be low. The outcome is determined by the step you set, right? And so control the nature of the step. And this is where we can, people talk about low and high expectation. You can have the high end goal here, but take the steps. The steps might differ in terms of how quickly you get there. And so, for example, it could be if it's new to baking, actually the goal is to get the cake to rise. It might not taste very good, but we're getting the cake to rise. Or it could even be a step further back, which is I've put the ingredients in the right measures in the bowl on my own. Yeah. And that's a great first step, right? And so that's successful. So if actually that's the step, that's the step with the bigger goal of baking a cake. If the step in that baking session is for the child or indeed the adult to measure the ingredients out on their own, independently and accurately, then they're going to, that means they can feel that success. They can see that their actions led to a positive outcome. So it means they're more likely to take actions in the future on the next step towards the goal.
I like this example because it's away from the world of teaching, and therefore it's easier for me to instantly see, of course, they're not going to make a cake straight away. Of course, step one is going to be the mixing in a bowl and then turning on the oven, open the oven, all those different steps. And also, I'm quite relaxed with the idea that as a parent, sometimes you manipulate your response to support a long-term goal. So selfishly, my daughter, I doubt she's watching. I don't know. She's probably soon to be sleeping, I imagine.
My daughter's watching. She's right here.
There you go. Okay, right. Well, the fact she's here. So she needs to cover is, because one of the things I did, maybe you've done the same, is when my daughter was younger, she started making me tea in the morning, and it wasn't great, but it was tea. And so I praised it. And then she started making scrambled eggs, and they weren't great, and they were full of shell. And that was a shame, but I kept praising the outcome. And now, like, we have a pretty good situation at a weekend, and I had to step back, and it took 6 months and step by step. So I'm happy with that as parent. Then when I go into a classroom, sometimes I seem to forget all of that, and I'll go, right, we're doing this. PowerPoint, show, bang, can you do it? Then I say, they're not very motivated, Neil, they're not very motivated, they're not. This is the thing. So I feel like this is a good example. What do you think, what's the key lesson I can learn from cake baking to improve my teaching?
You can have the big goal in mind,
Yep.
but it's steps. And then that's what you help the student to measure success against in that practice, is against that step. It's against that step. That's what they are assessing their ability to take their actions and yield a positive result. It's against that step. There might be the temptation to go all the way over here, and we know there's a big picture. But actually, it's all about those steps, and it could be semi-independently, it could be independently, so you can change those variables. The point being is they feel they have been successful at something, that their actions has yielded to some kind of positive outcome. And if it hasn't, they understand why. They understand the action that they took and why it didn't lead to the result, and that there is going to be an opportunity to revisit that and to be successful at it. And so it means that then they can continue that trajectory of up. It's, you know, Oliver Cagliogli even did a wonderful job at actually illustrating the book in one picture, and it really is that picture on the front.
Got our steps.
It is those steps. He nailed the book in one picture. I don't know how he did it. You know, yeah.
So this is good. So we're breaking things into steps. Then self-efficacy is going to be supportive if I'm very clear on creating a scenario in which the young people I work with can succeed on that step, and they know where it's heading. So there's that. I can see where the staircase is going. But so this sounds like a helpful idea. How is it different from growth mindset? I'm like, I'd sort of do that already because we're a growth mindset school. Or what's going on there?
It's a good question. I think it's first of all, it's recognizing this doesn't transfer across domains. This is within expecting a student who's, you know, making those steps and that progress in science to just walk into an English lesson and take their efficacy with them as if it's some form of trait. Is for the birds. That's not going to happen. We need to recognize that an individual's feeling of efficacy is linked and is reciprocally determined by the environment they're in. The task demand, yes, but also the environment they're in. It's not necessarily something that is just uniquely held within the individual. And I feel like sometimes with the growth and mindset narrative, we channel the environment into the individual, and then the individual can hold that as if we're building up some form of trait capacity. With self-efficacy, we're not. That's in constant flux with the environment.
So when I finish teaching psychology and then pick up my guitar and try and sing and play, the fact that I've done one thing moderately well has no impact upon next thing. So we're not domain specific. Or
I think it's a subtler. I think in terms of, it might make you feel good, which might temporarily give you an uplift and give you a willingness to take a risk. Yeah, sure. But will that stick? Will that stick? Probably not. Like you're then looking for the hit elsewhere rather than actually, how do we help you feel that you take an action in this domain, it will yield a positive outcome. So I'm wondering how many times I can say yield in one. Well, I need to think of.
I think we hit 6. Six is good. 6 is good. So we have then, to what extent will it help me outside of the classroom? If you have boosted my self-efficacy is pretty strong in relation to my understanding of the states of matter and ability to apply that to different questions. Great. How does that get back to your original goal, which is I'm in the game to make people think they can shift and shape the direction and course of their own life?
If you can imagine doing that across, this is the beautiful thing of schools.
Yeah.
Imagine if you went into your English lesson and felt that way. You then left your maths lesson and you felt that way. Your science lesson, you felt that way. Your interaction with your peers and your social situations and kind of clubs and after school clubs you were doing, you also felt that way in those clubs. You've now got choices. You know, you've got choices where you can decide for yourself, right? This is what I want to pursue. This is where I feel I can I can have my efficacy, where I can feel I can shape and influence. We're giving people choices.
Okay.
And I think the more that we can do that, a kind of multi-hypothesis makes it harder for people to not find scenarios. And then, of course, if we're doing that across multiple situations and we're spending 7-8 hours a day feeling efficacious, of course, that's going to affect our self-worth in the long run. Of course, that's going to affect things like confidence, our ability to we're thinking about, if we even think about personality, conscientiousness, if we think about our openness to experience, is there a subtle, delicate link between feeling efficacious 7 hours a day and the our wider psychological development? I'd hazard to bet, yes, I think it would be pretty good for us.
So
yeah.
This is good. So we think if that happens consistently, then it's there's positive, because it links and I feel better and I'm giving options. I feel there's also something there. It's just good in itself, isn't it? If you've got the option of, I've got an hour, either feeling that I can't do it or that I can, I'll take the second one.
Yeah.
And then the flip side is, then I feel that maybe a narrow emphasis upon curriculum knowledge, and knowledge is all good, and retrieval practice, and I don't know, topic summaries. I can go into my lesson, and when I'm planning, I'm not thinking about the emotional landscape of the room, and I'm not thinking about what my students are learning longer term. So I feel that this is maybe where self-efficacy has a role to play as well, and that just it makes the hour a more positive time, and that should have value in itself, because they're there for several years, aren't they? You want it to be fun.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one of the beautiful things about the theory, so as someone who studies how adults and people in general make decisions, and the challenges that our adult development faces us, I think one of the hardest things we have, and teaching presents us with a lot of these, is binaries, right? So when we really struggle as adults struggle to hold two disparate, seemingly disconnected perspectives in one. We need scaffolds and structures to do that. And yet we can think through that, we can sense make it, but sometimes there are concepts that actually force us to hold the whole, because you can't do the action without taking both into account. So if we think about self-efficacy and instruction, like using instruction to raise your someone's self-efficacy, yes, you have to think about the instructional component of it in terms of how you're maintaining attention, how you're chunking the task down, yes, but you have to think about the relational component. You can't just divorce them away if you're ultimately trying to help someone feeling more efficacious in the task. So it's a kind of a unifying force for things that might otherwise be considered one way or the other way, or one priority over another priority.
Okay.
Or yeah.
So I'm getting that then to focus on self-efficacy is going to help me to think really carefully about the principles of instruction. And some of that seems like a reframing of ideas. Then obviously there's no new ideas. This is reframing things that are out there, but it's then from the angle that I want students to have this impression that they can do it, or if they can't do it, to know why they can't do it, and then what they need to do next to get there. So that's good. And then built into self-efficacy is that there's an emotional aspect to it, which is when it doesn't work, you're going to feel this, we're going to recognize that. Because that takes us to our next thing. So in theory, we have 4 sections and we've just finished section 1. So this is interesting, but this is okay, because we're kind of learning as we go. So you have told us that self-efficacy is an individual sense of their capacity to complete an action or task to a particular standard in a particular domain. So in science, that could be applying my understanding of the states of matter to a particular question. Is that right, or is that wrong?
No, sounds about
okay.
Yeah,
so in baking, that's me being able to bake a cake or to do the first few steps. What about in English? So self-efficacy in English, that's very broad, but can you give me an example of what that would look like? Or not, because not is fine.
No, I'm going to try. I'm going to go deep. I'm dyslexic, so this is going to be really interesting. Okay, so why might I not feel efficacious in English? Or indeed what? So that might take many forms. So if we're thinking about English literature, I do not feel me reading this text. I will be able to read this text and understand its meaning. Okay, so maybe I've picked up the book. My skills in kind of reading complex text is emergent. I look at the book, it's really quite thick, it's big. I look at the words, they're very hard to digest. I'm not feeling particularly that I'm going to be able to break these words down. Okay, so why am I then going to try? Now, I might passively read the text with the class, might hear, but am I really trying to understand? Am I really trying to break that word down? Am I really trying to use context around the word to engage? Am I even going to try and pick up the strategies? Why would I pick up the strategies that are around me, or maybe the teachers taught me, if I don't feel that I can actually use those strategies to yield a positive outcome? I'm not. I'm going to take a much more passive position. And so even on something such as engagement with the text itself. Yeah.
So I could have lost you if I said, today we're reading this. Here's the first page. Read this. Some of the class are gone at that point because it's long. There's complex words. Okay.
Yeah.
So then, if this is a cake, I go, well, that's mad. I'm not going to get Neil to bake a cake. I'm going to get Neil first of all to do this step and this step and this step. So that's kind of useful in the background, isn't it? And then there's I feel there's some tasks that have difficulty baked into them. So baking analogies come up again. Inferences. So I sometimes get information home, my daughter's saying they need to improve the inferences they draw from text. And I think, whoa, wait, what? How? There's so much there. I just got that's saying they just need to know more about all the things, and then they'll be well. So we want to avoid that. There needs to be quite actionable and specific.
Yeah, and the better we can be with that specific, because that's setting a step.
Yes.
The more actionable we can be with that step, like and this is where sometimes people say, oh, but that's saying setting low expectations to be setting a step. No, not if you've got a longer term outcome.
Yeah.
If you've got that longer term outcome and you're recognizing that one step and where the other 5 are going to, that's high expectations, high scaffold, which for me is what we should be aiming toward. This idea actually setting that feedback is the opportunity to set that step, which someone can take the action on, and then create that self-fulfilling prophecy of, I've acted, that felt good. Okay, I'll try again. Oh, that felt good. Okay, right. I think I'm getting this right. I'll try again. I'll try again. I'll try again. I might try something harder next time. I might move on to the next step.
Okay, so we think self-efficacy has a significant place in my thinking about instruction, and you've started to branch into that already. And there's going to be it's going to cover the shuffling of papers. This is good. So we then have four words: attention, retention, motor reproduction, and motivation. What are these terms and why do they matter?
Oh gosh, right. Okay. So the reasons they matter, and this is where I think a lot of this book is not about reinventing the wheel. A lot of this book is genuinely about that there's some pretty consistent narratives in education, just about tweaking around the edge, or sometimes repurposing some of the things we might do. So when we're talking about attention, it's that notion of how does our instruction enable the individual to attend internally? Like, is this instruction enable them to hold the information inside their head? And am I able to manage and maneuver their attention to where it needs to be? And critically, am I putting distracting factors in place? When we're talking about retention, we're
going to go slower. So this is good. So we've gone, these are mediational factors that affects learning. And you've said the first one is attention. Yeah. And there's a lot there. So and people are going to have to read the book. And we're not going to get it all across in an hour.
Sorry.
If we do that, then we've undermined your sales. This is no good. If they want to read the book, then they should go to John Catt and website and then click through. And if they want a discount, then they can write the discount code JC, so for John Catt, TTR for Teachers Talk Radio, 2425, and they get a 20% discount from this book, but also while you're there, all of the books. So buy more books. This is good. And so we're back to the world. They are. This is loads there. So we've got. You've said that attention is mediates the chances of me learning, or mediates social learning and learning. And then you said sometimes I can overwhelm. So we were about to do that there because there's so much in there. So then let's do a bit more on attention. So when I'm thinking about attention and I'm instructing, what do I have to bear in mind?
Am I making it as easy as possible? Well, as easy as possible is probably the wrong word. Am I making it so that it's utterly clear where I need the student to be looking, what I need them to be really paying attention, what I really want them to be hearing and processing? Okay. And for example, I've slowed my speech down. I'm not using lots of words. I didn't even say lots and lots of words. It's recognizing that every word, I put it on the screen or my voice, is a penny taken away from the attention pot, the kind of attention debt, as
Yeah.
it were. And then, have I given enough support for that individual to hold that idea in their mind and focus on that in their mind? Often we talk about how I am holding their attention as almost some kind of performative act, but
Yeah.
attention is in the mind, and so how are we presenting and giving information in a way that enables them to attend to it through their thinking process?
Okay, so thinking about self-efficacy forces me not to think about not overwhelming students.
No.
I've slowed down. You see, we've both done it. We've sort of
Yeah.
mirrored each other. I don't want to overwhelm. I'm going to think very carefully about the words I use. I'm not going to throw in bizarre asides, little jokes, distractions. Doesn't always help. What
No.
about visually? So when I'm explaining and I'm thinking, I want my student at end of my explanation to go, is that it? And I go, yeah, that's it. That's it. This is it. So I won't say that. What do I use visually to make that sort of thing happen?
The simplest diagram you can think of. In my head, I always go Nordic. I
Okay.
think of that Nordic clean design and
Yeah.
minimalist as possible. So it could be a picture that we say captures the attention. We don't need to capture their attention. It's something that they can attend to. That's different. If I'm trying to attract their attention, that this picture behind me might attract someone's attention.
Yeah.
But I should be taking that off the wall if I want them listening to what I'm saying or being able to attend to the key message.
Okay.
So when it comes to a diagram, ideas of dual coding, which is also in some of the in action books, and thinking really hard about the load that's putting on the pupil.
Okay. So I have a friend. Actually, I interviewed him the other week. I'm enjoying this because I learn a lot. This is good. And the ideas seem to match. So he said he wants to write a book that's called Is That It? And he says that if you want that back from your students, you go, they go, this is a really difficult thing. No, here we go. I'm going to explain it as clearly as I can. And I've practiced this and I've done it many, many times. And I know I just draw 3 lines and then this line and I say this, 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 and this. And the student says, is that it? And you go, yeah, that's it. That's it. This is good. Okay. So then we've got attention.
I would read that book.
That's
I
okay. I'll
would
tell you.
read that book.
It's Dan Borman. There's a show on Teacher Talk Radio they can listen to. Dan Borman. You're saying
Dan,
you would read that book.
Buy your book. I am buying that book when you do it. I think
that's good. I'm going to send you his podcast because he's good.
So when this is that it, that is a student to me saying, I could have a go at this.
That's it, isn't it? They go, is that it? And there's so much packed in that moment because they've got, I can do it. It's not as hard as I thought. Yes, 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 and yes. Not, I'm going to set some questions that really fox them. I feel sometimes we could lose time on this, so we're not good. Exam writers sometimes get that wrong. In schools, we're really going to test them. I'm going to throw this at them because I know they didn't do well in the national exams and they're going to do that. But why am I doing that? But that's not for now. But there's something there. So we've then gone attention and we've boiled it down to, is that it? So that's good. Then we've got retention. So another thing, another factor that mediates learning. Tell me a bit about that.
So, I mean, when we are asked to perform toward an outcome, often we need to have held it in our head. If we can't, and now that's for 2 reasons. One, because we actually need to hold it in our head if we're going to produce the outcome.
Yeah,
it needs to be in our mind. And the second, if we don't feel we've retained it, why would we act? If I do not feel that knowledge is secure inside my mind, I'm going to be on quite shaky ground when I come to apply it. I might therefore not try to. And so if we think again back to, I feel my actions can lead to a positive outcome. Why? Because we want the students to act, because action gives feedback, right? Which self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
If they've not had the opportunity to build that knowledge and retain it for a period of time, I mean, it's pretty, for me, it's self-explanatory. Why would you act?
Yeah. So it seems there's two things there. So we've got retention's important. So if I can't hold it in my head, then I can't learn it or use it. But you're hinting that I need to know that I know it and can use it.
I need to feel like I know it. Like,
yes. So we're back to feelings again. And
Yes.
For me, and it might just be the time I trained, I have enjoyed the shift towards evidence-based practice and cognitive learning and all of that. And sometimes I think there's an emotional landscape that this doesn't fully capture.
Yeah.
And maybe this is one of those ways in. So
I used to train a lot of teachers, and they tend to, some start with, I want to do the relational work. I want to build relationship and prioritize that. Not that they can prioritize instruction, but it's to prioritize the relational. And then they'd flip priorities. And with others, it's the other way around. But you need both. Really great teaching is harnessing both. And that's what self-efficacy, I think, even in that section of instruction, says, is if we're going to help people feel efficacious, know and feel matters. And
so the feeling matters.
Yeah.
And then the feeling is an outcome of having retained it and practiced it. Yeah. So that feeling is a bit like happiness. You can't aim for that directly.
No.
Is that fair?
I think you're right. I think, for a lot of the conversations around motivating and helping people move forward, there's nothing better than doing it and receiving positive outcome.
Yes. Okay.
That's going to lead to a good feeling. Yeah. It's just then sometimes having to do the verbal persuasion to have a go, even if they're not quite sure.
Okay. So that I think is a good link to another idea. So there's a lot more, and people will need to buy the book to read the more. But you mentioned motivation is one more of the 4 mediational factors. So we've got attention, retention, reproduction. We've kind of alluded to. Don't have to read more. Then we've got motivation, and you talk about thinking about building bridges to motivation. So what does that mean?
So I think that's where the goal setting comes in part. Like, how do we build motivation? How do we we set them a goal? And now that can be a long-term goal with short-term steps.
Yep.
And in the later section in the book, I talk about what those steps can look like, and we've alluded to some of that conversation today. The second one is normalization of failure. Like actually, when we take action, the thing that might stop us from taking action is we're scared of the consequence. So actually, but we need them to act if they're going to get the feedback, which better links the action to their outcome, which therefore means they're more likely to be successful in the future.
Okay.
So the normalization of failure. But the third one is trust in another's judgment.
Yeah.
So that I'm not sure. Trust me. That ability, and then that student to then decide, okay, I'm going to. We have to help students to borrow our self-efficacy in a way, our efficacy in them, to take the leap of faith. And so that's how we overcome that kind of cycle of, well, how do we help people act when they don't feel like acting? Okay. It's a normalization of failure. It's thinking about the goal that we're setting them and reminding them of that goal and where this step fits within the goal. But then it's actually building that trust over time with that pupil that they're not sure, but they're going to go with you. Because
so let's go back to our English example, which is maybe unreasonable because neither of us teach English. But I want to build a bridge to motivation, and I'm looking out at a class, and there are 4 or 5 of the you were describing earlier, where you go, I'm overwhelmed because there's all these words and so many things. But how do I build bridges there? Let's try and link it to that. Or if you want to change domain, that's fine. But I want to know in a classroom.
I like the challenge of going to English.
Okay.
So, first of all, I'd probably have set the bigger goal. If I knew that this was a likely challenge, I would have set the goal actually about really focusing on the first page and listen, like, okay, what's the goal? Actually, to pick out 7 words that I have understood using context. So if I'm thinking of a Shakespearean text where you're having to rely on contextual cue in order to understand the meaning of phrases, words, sentences, English teachers forgive me, but this idea that there's a kind of a pocket of sentence or words that I can use context to understand what might be happening.
Okay.
Sounds like a good step.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to model, show, exemplify that the likelihood of them getting that wrong is high, maybe at the start, and that's okay. That's
Yeah.
okay. We're going to work through failure, because by the end of the lesson, those failures will enable us to understand context better. We'll at least be able to know the wrong interpretations, or the incorrect, or the less than accurate interpretations.
Okay.
But then I will have also, and one of the examples in the book is, I will have thought, am I ready to bring students to this challenge? Is my relationship with these pupils ready for them to put their judgment in themselves aside and to trust mine?
Okay, so this is, I would like to know about this. So I'm a new teacher or new to a school, and I want to teach successfully and then to do as well as possible. And your book, I think, is saying early doors, you need to think about that, building trust in how you do it.
Yeah.
So while we're there, there's 250 people watching this live. It's very exciting.
Yeah, oh my word. Okay.
So, and they're ready to hear your next answer, which is then, okay, so we just started in a new, maybe we're starting in a new school after Easter, maybe we're starting next year, maybe we're about to kick off with a new class. And you're saying, actually, in the forefront of my mind, those first few weeks needs to be, they need to trust me. How am I getting there? How
we help them feel that they're going to come out of that classroom having succeeded.
Okay.
That bit, I think there's someone who has done a lot of kind of reading around Carl Rogers and kind of the kind of person-centered approaches. They are all important. Like building trust in of itself is a good thing. Like, you know, sharing information about yourself, those kind of intentional acts of building trust. The other way of getting there is actually students leaving the classroom feeling they have actually achieved the step toward the goal. That builds trust. Like they're coming out of the classroom going, oh my gosh, I got it. I got it. I actually got it. And
that is that it moment.
Yeah. It's that, and that happening again and again and again means later on, I might go, okay, right, they're trusting me now. That means I can take them to places that otherwise they might not have gone with me in the first few weeks. Might completely reject it because they didn't feel efficacious or didn't feel so efficacious enough to take the next challenge. But now maybe I can take that risk a bit more. And so, yeah.
So
meet 2025 BET Award winner Kialo EDU, the 100% free tool for thoughtful, inclusive classroom discussion. On Kialo, students contribute instantly and simultaneously to create an interactive map of a discussion, deepening their subject knowledge and enhancing their critical thinking skills. Set tasks, track participation, and provide personalized feedback in just a few clicks. And since it's compatible with all your favorite LMS platforms, it slots seamlessly into your existing workflow. Over 1 million educators and students are already using Kialo to make the world a more thoughtful place. Join them today at kialo-edu.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out! Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading!
Then narrating that seems important. So I've got a class. You may remember a few weeks ago, we tried this. We didn't get it at first. And now we can do it. Like, remember? That's it. Great. We can do it. Now we're going to do this again. You're going to find it a bit tricky. In fact, we're not going to get it right. This is fine. This is how learning works. So we want to do that. So this seems like a useful reminder. And like you're saying, it's bringing together both the pedagogy, but also that emotional landscape thing, which is, I clearly don't have quite the language for that, which is where there's a gap. But I feel that's important. This is helpful. So some teachers seem to be able to do that more effectively than others. This kind of drawing the best out of students, helping them feel they can do it. So, for example, I mentored a student a few years ago, And it was during lockdown, and I asked them about 18 months into the process, they were all at sea at first. What are you looking forward to today? And she literally looks around like this. She's looking over her shoulder. She leans in and whispers. She said, "Maths." So, okay, that's good. Because she was clearly a bit embarrassed by it. So, why are you looking forward to maths? And she said, because my teacher said my grade's not going to fall from the sky, and I can do it. And this teacher just seems to have that capacity to make students feel that. So, say I'm not that teacher, what do I need to think about and do? So I would like to be in a classroom where students leave going, they believe I can do it, but that doing it is not just good for me. It's like, I can do really well here. And that child was transformed. Like, they went on to do incredibly well. This is great. And it's almost like alchemy, but it's not magic. Like, something's happened. I want some advice on that.
Oh, okay. So there's three ways my brain can go. That's how I'm gonna try. First of all, sometimes a teacher, a group of students and the teacher just click. Their natural way of expressing goals, express how they set up practice, seems to click with that collective. And indeed, there is this idea of collective self-efficacy.
Okay.
So we've got self-efficacy, ourself, but then collective is within the group, how we can work toward a goal. And some teachers are really good at harnessing that, but also just something natural, as you said, alchemy of the relationships in that room make for a strong sense of collective efficacy, which kind of almost can bypass the individual, a bit outside of the notion of this book. But sometimes that happens. So I don't want to say it's all within our control, because we're reciprocally determined, which means we ourselves, individual and environment. How can I make that likely from the actions that I have available to me? I think it's recognizing that the tools of our trade, how we set up our instruction, how we establish practice, can help students get there, particularly if they can see that we have done that, right? And so I think that point then around narrating is really important, like actually talking through what you're doing with them and why, that there is a wider goal. I want you to leave this classroom feeling more efficacious than when you left. This is why we are doing what we are doing today. This is our bigger goal. This is the steps that we're going to take to get. We are going to take there to get there. We are going to take.
So we've shifted to we, haven't we? So we've got, if there was one person in the room, then it's a simpler model that goes, my job is to help you to feel that you can do it, or where you can't do it, to learn that what you've done hasn't helped you to do it, and then this is what to do next. And now we're adding another layer, which is the way the teacher narrates what we do as a class. We work hard, we do this. This is why we're here. Remember where we were, all of that. This is good. Okay, so there's something about that kind of narration, that capacity. I have a resource question. So we talked a bit about pedagogy and self-efficacy, and I wondered if you have a view on PowerPoint, and whether in itself, is it a tool that supports teaching in a self-efficacy informed way, or are there some risks there? And you can clearly see I have a view, but I feel this might be a nice little snippet for.
Oh, this is interesting.
Yeah.
So if any of my old trainees are listening, I used to make them for the first 5 weeks of teacher training. We do the same lesson every time, but they couldn't use a PowerPoint. So they'd prepare a lesson. They'd be given a whiteboard.
So you do have a view on PowerPoint.
I do have a view on PowerPoint.
This is good. Okay, carry on.
Because I would want them as teachers to develop their efficacy in actually being able to explain something rather than the computer explaining it for them.
Yeah.
Now, afterwards, introducing tools that might augment and support, fine. But the first step for me was, you can explain this on your own. You can explain this using what's inside your head, using a whiteboard and a pen.
Okay.
And I think if you have the PowerPoint with the built-in explanation, unless it's being modeled as to how they came to that explanation, that they've got the opportunity to practice giving that explanation out to the class, that the mechanisms of it are really clear and well modeled.
Yeah.
Will they develop the efficacy to stand in front of the room and explain, or then do that shared modeling where it's a much more dynamic environment, or then pass that over to the student if they're not so efficacious in their capacity to explain it in the first place. So I think from a teacher training perspective, I think there's a real power of withholding from the PowerPoint so they feel efficacious with the whiteboard pen. What was your view?
I think that I say what I think, and I've stolen my friend Dan's phrase again. So PowerPoint leads to show and hope for teaching and coverage. And so for me as a teacher, I might not know if I can explain thing A because I've never actually tried to explain it. And I just go, here's a slide, next slide, next slide, next slide. And I can be 10 minutes into the lesson and I could be 12 slides in. And then for student self-efficacy, I'm a bit concerned. As a teacher, if you said, go on then, what is it you're teaching today? And I'll often ask trainee teachers at our school, like, okay, you're about to teach a lesson on evolution. What are you conveying? And they'll go, oh, I've got these resources. No, like, just tell me. So I think there's something about that that's kind of crucial. So for our social channels, are you saying early teachers should approach, polemically,
I'm not.
PowerPoint's dangerous for trainee teachers? Are we saying it's dangerous for trainee teachers? Or
I
not?
don't. I wouldn't go at all. I think
you wouldn't say dangerous. It sounded like that.
No, I wouldn't say dangerous because that's my perspective on how I would train teachers in my cohort with the context I've got now. But again, this is where efficacy comes in. It might be actually I start with the PowerPoint and give them the PowerPoint because their steps and their goal needs to be different according to where they're at. I go from I don't think there's I don't go from I have a preference. But what really matters beyond my preference is where those students are at, what's the goal they need to work toward, and what steps can help to get there. And I could have one cohort of trainee teachers and do something completely different with them. And then we look at some of the resources coming out of Oak, which are absolutely fabulous, and think, well, how can we find a more integrated way where actually one reinforces the efficacy of the other? So
because the flip side, I guess, if you're telling a teacher you're going to teach this topic next, and you can't use PowerPoints, and actually they're almost like your English student, overwhelmed with, goodness gracious, that's a huge task. Where do I begin? This is bad news for them and for the class in front of them, isn't it? Because then we're kind of starting from scratch. So that makes sense.
And so then it's like, okay, actually, if this could be a scaffold to them getting in front of the classroom, feeling a little bit, okay, their trust is in the resource. Yeah, but sometimes we need to put our trust somewhere.
Yep.
And then over time, showing them the mechanisms of that, and then working towards developing their own style of explanation based on obviously the evidence, cognitive science, all that stuff, and the
So maybe a more nuance, and this is much fairer because that's a much more balanced view. But we're going, if it's sometimes a good idea to take your group of teachers and say, can you explain this idea with just a board pen and your voice? Like being able to explain something, that's a good practice. It's a good thing to kind of good exercise, good discipline.
But critically, it might be as you're a teacher educator, you might decide the scaffold. The next step is, okay, right, can I give them the use of a PowerPoint to help them to work toward that larger goal?
Yeah.
I think that's where for me self-efficacy really helps, because it presents a lens for you to be making the choices around the steps and the goal that you set.
Okay, thank you. So you'll be pleased to know that according to my plans, we're halfway through. So people would definitely need to read the book. So you've talked about instruction. We've talked about self-efficacy. We've reminded people that if they want to buy the book, go on to John Catt. And the discount code is JC TTR 2425. How much do they save?
I think you said 20%.
20%, yeah, from self-efficacy
20%.
20%.
I feel like I should write that at the bottom of my mug.
I think it's just worth having that there. So JC TTR 2425, and they're going to find out about the theory itself, why you think it supports teaching, and then we've also got implications for instruction, implication for practice, and then we've talked a bit about normalizing failure, about breaking things down, and then you move on to look at behavior.
Yeah.
So can you tell me a little bit about the relationship between self-efficacy, so Bandura's theory, and why that's important to the way I understand, manage, manipulate, or shape behavior? What have we got on that?
So if we see, and I think one of the, again, we talk about that integrating perspective. What does Bandura do? It helps us integrate different perspectives that otherwise we might see as kind of takes one down route or the other. I think what Bandura helps us to kind of ask the question is, actually for a lot of children, a consistent classroom environment of, great consistent rewards and, sanction if necessary, like to within that environment for when they don't meet the expectations of behavior is going to work for a lot of pupils. But for some, we have to ask the question, well, if that's not working, why? Something deeper might be happening. And one of those things, just one, could be actually the student feels they can't execute those behaviors successfully, i.e. they don't feel they can actually meet those expectations. Or, and this was I wish I remembered the name of the person who introduced me to this question, that actually the student feels more efficacious in something else that just so happens to conflict with the classroom expectation. So I think often as what might be referred to as the class clown. Okay.
Yeah.
Ultimately, we're going to do things we feel the most efficacious in. That's a driver, right?
Yeah.
Why would I pick something that I don't feel efficacious in over something that I do? That is going to be a much more of a driver of behavior. Now, if I feel very efficacious in my capacity to make people laugh, maybe in inappropriate moments, I'm going to use opportunities to push on that. And that happens to be against the classroom expectation. So I've tried to word it quite specifically in the book, where there's an unintentional clash between what the student is efficacious in and going against what the classroom needs them to be and do for it to be a conducive and productive learning environment. Because that's a clash, isn't an intentional act. If I want to watch the world burn, that is, I feel efficacious in X, and it's not fitting with the environment's expectations. And so how do we then, this is the idea of sometimes seeing the breaking of the school rules as not doing something. We're always doing something.
Okay. So behavior, the behavior the student is exhibiting, presenting, or just acting out is doing something.
No.
And maybe they've gone, can't do that. So they've been presented with 6 pages to read in 10 minutes and summarize it and tell me what you think it's about. And they're like, I can't do that. So then their next move is, what can I do? Well, I can do this. And then I think there was a blog post or article that focused on what students employ school for, so what you get back. So I put in effort and I get told I'm doing well, then that's what I'm employing. I'm employing my school for that. And then if I put in effort and school isn't paying me with positive regard, then I look elsewhere. And that's when I start employing school for other things. So I'm going to go, actually, I'm going to do X, Y, or Z. Okay. So as a classroom teacher, what's my next move? So I've now, okay, great. I now understand this better and I'm less cross. So I'm frustrated and it's very difficult because I've got 3 students at the moment who maybe it's self-efficacy, maybe it's something else, but they're not at the minute engaging in the thing I want them to do. They're engaging in something else. They're actively doing another thing.
Yeah.
What's next?
I want them to watch for a while. I think we try to act and solve.
Okay.
Right. If this is a consistent factor,
Yeah.
first of all, is the environment right? Like, is the sanctions and reward systems actually consistently applied? Because if they're not, we've got to rule that out straight away.
Yeah.
Because that's a massive environmental factor, right? Until you roll that out, going deeper doesn't make much sense, right? So if this is a consistent thing, what's the pattern? What's the pattern in that behavior, right? And from that pattern, it's then asking, okay, is this a case of, or it could be a matter of, is there specific situations which the child is choosing not to engage in, i.e. that they don't feel efficacious in? Is there a consistency? Is there a pattern?
Okay, so if it's every time there's a long reading, this happens. I go, okay, think about that. Okay. That's kind of on me then, isn't it, really? That's an interesting thing.
Yeah, okay, right, that's interesting. So that suggests a kind of efficacy. There's a potential efficacy need around that task. I don't feel particularly efficacious in this, which is diverting my attention towards other choices. Okay, but then actually, is this actually quite sporadic? Is this actually something the child feels very efficacious in which case why is it they feel efficacious in that? There's a question to be asked. There's a why. Okay. And then from there, it's the same ideas around goals and steps to work towards someone feeling efficacious in something, or to feel more. And this kind of, I think it's Timothy Walton, Dalton, I've forgotten the last name, but this notion of redirecting that child's behavior towards something that they feel efficacious and within the classroom. But the main thing is watch for a bit, observe, write it down, see if there's a pattern.
Yeah.
I think too often, sometimes we try to jump to the solution. What's the solution going to apply? But we've perhaps only watched for 20 minutes. And that's really hard to do. It's a really busy classroom environment. I'm not saying it's not, but we're talking about those children who are not responsive to consistency in terms of reward and sanction, consistent classroom environments. If that's the case, then it's worth taking a bit of time, working collectively and collaboratively with other colleagues as well, because that they might also be seeing patterns, to understand, and using that self-efficacy as a lens to understand that behavior. And then it's kind of going into kind of how to intervene.
So again, it seems like that at least the way that you presented the idea, it marries together. Well, of course, behavior is a product of routines and clarity and consistent expectations. And in that sort of environment, that's the place where you're more likely to be able to teach in a way that students step by step learn they can do this, and then they can do that, and then they work towards that goal. So we're not saying that behavior is all this individual, diagnose, adapt for every single scenario, and yet get my routines in place. And I think actually in my head, and for the majority of students most of the time, they come in, they do the thing, they say, is that it? And they go, yeah, that's it. And they're learning. Then it starts to change. At that point, I can go, okay, let me take a step back. So this individual, this group, or these 2 or 3 students, when thing X comes up, I need to think about it a bit more. And that's a good reflection point, isn't it? So that's then why that might happen. Okay.
Yeah.
And then at that point, I might need to adapt, or this is hard because I'm teaching 30 students. And then,
100%.
Yes. Okay.
100%. And that's why I think relying on your collective, you're not the only teacher in your school, relying on your collective. But coming back to that, how do I help them experience mastery whilst in this classroom? What are the goals I need to set them, the steps I need to take them there?
So I think, and we've got a couple of questions to follow, but over the kind of last hour or so, you've made a clear case that thinking about self-efficacy would enhance our planning and teaching of lessons. So it's worth looking into further. And I think that's definitely worth pursuing. And I'm aware that when one idea becomes significant, common, supported, like emphasized everywhere, this can lead to problems. So if I take I'm going to go, I'm really sold with this idea. I'm just actually thinking about CPD in my school next year. We're going to go with a self-efficacy focus. We're going to tell students and staff, we're doing this. Like, first of all, great, because we'd have to buy loads of copies of this. But also, what do I miss out on? Or if that's my sole lens, if we go, actually, we're putting all our eggs in a self-efficacy basket, what might the risks be?
A really good question. So we come back to, why are we in the building? What are we trying to do? The notion of agency, right? Self-efficacy is just one component of that, right? So helping, now people see the word feel and think, oh, it's about their feelings. It's not a counseling method. Like, it's about actually giving individuals mastery experiences with appropriate steps and goals, and holding and containing feelings and recognizing it as part of the process. And the relational component of education, really critical part of that. Yes, absolutely. But there is that working toward that they can take action, which leads to a positive outcome. I think that there are some skills that underpin that are enhanced by self-efficacy, but need a really good solid basis. Things like feedback, assessment and feedback, absolutely critical. Like sequencing in the curriculum. Like when we talk about steps and larger goals, that we're talking in the curriculum, we're talking about sequencing, So I think there's those kind of underpinning aspects of kind of school delivery and lesson delivery that are enhanced by self-efficacy, but also need them to be pretty strong if that's going to be the lens of focus. Otherwise, you just get caught down the relational trap. And self-efficacy is beyond just the relational.
Tell me a bit more about the relational trap, because that seems like we need to avoid a polar swing.
Yeah,
towards that.
So it isn't about students feeling confident. It's about students feeling their actions and seeing their actions, not just self-efficacy is a contact sport. You can't, at some point you have to do the action, which yields the outcome, which enables you to make that concrete kind of efficacious judgment in the future. And so when we talk about building their confidence to do things, they've got to do it. Like, that's how we help them. That's how we help. We are building them toward action. So I think there's that kind of, I think because we talk about relational components and feelings in the book, that it's about working directly on their feelings rather than actually helping them to take action and be successful at that, can indirectly promote a strong feeling.
Yes.
Okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So that's my take was that that sense of self-efficacy is important, and it's an outcome of something else that's happened, and there's a risk. If I go, today we're going to do this self-efficacy, it's a bit like me saying today we're going to be happy. Like that is self-defeating. Yes, absolutely, I'd like you to be happy, but if I aim for that, it's all gone south. And I think you gave me a good corrective. So at first, my first read was self-efficacy help students learn they can do it. It's not quite that. So my understanding is it's help students learn that their action could do it, and if it hasn't made them do it, then correct me there. So if I go, actually, it's all about learning you can do it. What have I got wrong? Because that becomes my strapline. We tell all the students and stuff, and we're missing something.
Yeah, I think it's knowing that they can do it. I think it's knowing that they can take action. So it's an action-orientated factor, will yield a positive outcome in that domain, so the domain-specific aspect, and that it leads to an outcome. So it isn't just a cognitive, kind of reflective exercise. Oh, do you feel you can do this? Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
Okay. But
okay.
Yeah, the proof's in the pudding. You know. But back to that point around the traps, the kind of, if we were running out CPD. So I think there's the kind of the relational aspect, the fact that there's quite a lot of things that need to be strong in a school because it develops upon and enhance. But agency, self-efficacy is just one component of helping someone feel agentic, that they feel they can influence and shape the environment in their lives. Like an overlapping, we talk about it in the book, but overlapping but separate components. Do they have the experiences to experience mastery? Do they have access to the knowledge? This does not sit against a knowledge-based curriculum. If anything, it's saying knowledge is power. Yeah, because it helps us to feel agentic. Okay, well, what is going to help us use that knowledge if we feel we've got self-efficacy in the use of that knowledge? So all of these, so there are many different components, I think, that help people feel they can influence and shape their environment, their life course. Of which self-efficacy, I think, is a central component, but by all means not the only one.
So then, if I think that in my teaching or my school or my team, we're struggling to marry the kind of nuts and bolts of pedagogy and the relational aspect of teaching, then this is a good idea. So we're going to have a dinner party and we're going to invite Bandura, or you can come and speak for him. So
I've invite Bandura, please.
Okay, so we've got Bandura along, and then we're aware that's not everything. So we've actually, turns out there's 3 or 4 more seats at this dinner party. Who's coming?
Oh gosh. So I'll say a couple. There's one that is escaping me as going to appear.
Okay.
So I think the first one is I'd invite someone called Jane Lovinger. And she's an
Can you
adult,
repeat that again, Jane?
Lovinger, L-O-E.
Lovinger.
No, Jane.
Jane Lovinger. Okay.
Jane Lovinger. And she is an adult developmental psychologist. And the reason I'd invite her is because that tells us the long game. They're actually not finished at 18. There's a developmental trajectory that we're setting children up for that will pervade throughout the rest of their lives. And so I love the idea of actually bringing someone along that's actually focused on adulthood and actually talked about the developmental trajectory through adulthood.
Okay.
I would want to bring Carl Rogers, because he focuses so much toward the relational component. And I think that is, I think that's really powerful, because it gives, again, that kind of polar opposites view. So we've got Bandura, who's kind of trying to integrate the two.
Yeah.
We've got someone like Carl Rogers that focuses more on the relation. He's got and his book on becoming an effective teacher focuses on the relational components of teaching, which is a really great book. And then I wish I could pronounce his name, but he did a wonderful textbook on cognitive psychology in education. EYSNECK. I can't pronounce, but he did a wonderful textbook on cognitive psychology. And that, for me, I can remember reading that as a postgraduate, and indeed the work of Osha Goswami. And indeed, I'd invite Osha Goswami, who's not an instructionalist, but she's a developmentalist, and her book on cognitive science in the brain again. So you've got people who are thinking from a relational side, a cognitive side, kind of developmental side. They'd be the people I would bring to throw the big question. What are we doing? What are we in the game for? What are we educating for? And from there, how do we build our classrooms and our learning?
So I think, incredibly, despite the fact that we have gone on all kinds of tangents and there's lots of little anecdotes and stories on the way, we have come full circle with why we're in the game. We think that Bandura's self-efficacy theory is one of the ways into that big idea. And also, I feel like you've got a few more books there. So we've got, I want developmental psychology for teachers. What do I want to know about that? Or Rogers. But that's, I'm not the publisher. I just think that's an interesting thing, that there might be a gap there. I didn't know Carl Rogers had written that book.
I'll tell you what, I've just made a mistake. It wasn't. I've got the wrong psychologist in the EYSNEC one. I've forgotten it. I've completely forgotten it.
Luckily,
but it wasn't that name.
You can reply to this, and we can stick it out, can't we? We can go, actually, this is the person. That's okay. We'll get there. This is all good.
Oh, good. Okay, yes, but please, people, not that psychologist. A completely different
so
one.
Someone else. Yes. This is all good. So thank you very much.
Definitely Osha Goswami.
Okay, so definitely Goswami. And then thank you very much for time, particularly at the end of a long day. I've really enjoyed reading the book and finding out a bit more of it in our discussion this evening. And just a reminder that it's worth buying. And if you do buy it, go online, put in the discount code JCTTR2425, and you get 20% off that book and all of the books that are there. So it's definitely worth exploring. Neil, any final words before we kind of sign off?
Just been a really enjoyable experience. Thank you so much. And if as people read the book and they've got thoughts and ideas about how they take these ideas differently, I'd love to hear from them. Like, I really do, like things you like about, things you don't like about the book, actually, and just areas you disagree. Then by all means, get in touch. By the way, I have found the name of the book, the psychologist. So it's Michael Eisnick. So it was right. It's just the wrong Eisnick. Okay. Michael Eisnick. There we go. Okay. EYSNECK. Yes. Okay.
And then, so you welcome people commenting, feeding back, what they like, what they don't. How do they do that? How are they going to get hold of you?
Oh, great question. So they can find me on Blue Sky. Put my name into Neil Gilbride. That will come up. I'm still on X. My website, neilgilbride.co.uk, has my contact details on as well. Okay. More than welcome to drop in and say hello.
Fantastic. I look forward to hearing what they ask. And again, thanks again. Enjoy the rest of your evening. And
thank you.
I'm sure we'll be in touch again soon.
That'd be brilliant.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.